My mom looked right at my daughter and said, "You'll never be as pretty as your cousin." Then my sister added, "It's in her blood." But Arya didn't flinch. She smiled. She looked both of them in the eye and said, "I don't want to look like you." Then she pulled out a drawing and the whole table went silent. That was the moment everything shifted, not just in the room, but in me. My name is Lena Cross. I'm a mom, a daughter, a sister. And for a long time, I've been silent. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I got tired of yelling into a room full of people who only heard what they wanted to, especially when that room belonged to my mother. See, I come from a family where beauty is everything, elegance is rewarded, thinness is expected. And women? Well, women are best seen and admired, not heard and challenged. That's the way it's always been in my mother's house. It was that way when I was growing up. Always compared to my sister, Talia, who somehow inherited everything my mother ever wanted in a daughter. Sharp cheekbones, long legs, charm, and a knack for turning heads without ever trying. I was the creative one, the sensitive one, which was her polite way of saying, not pretty enough to compete. And now, 30 years later, I'm watching the same subtle cruelty being handed down to my daughter, Arya, 10 years old, quiet and kind, and strong in ways I hadn't realized until that moment. Arya is not like her cousin Sienna. Sienna is 11, going on 25. Straightened hair, lip gloss, ballet classes, designer sneakers. She's sweet, but she's a mirror of the legacy my mom praises: poise, polish, and good genes. Arya, on the other hand, has wild curls she refuses to tame. She wears mismatched socks. She spends hours drawing in her sketchbook instead of rehearsing for a recital. She once told me she didn't want to be a princess when she grows up. She wanted to be a truth teller. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I do now. It happened on a Sunday. We were at my mom's house for our usual monthly lunch. The roast was in the oven. The table was too formal. Everyone wore the mask they always wore, and the air was thick with unspoken judgments. My sister Talia was going on about how Sienna had been asked to model in some children's boutique shoot. She pulled out her phone and passed it around. "Oh, look at this one," she said, grinning. "She just looks expensive, doesn't she?" My mom gushed. "She's got that Cross family beauty. Not everyone's that lucky." I kept my head down. Arya sat beside me, flipping through a sketchbook in her lap. Then my mom turned to her, and with a tone that was almost casual, almost harmless, she said, "You know, sweetheart, you'll never be as pretty as your cousin." I froze. My fork clinked against the plate. I waited for someone else to say something, anything, but they didn't. Talia just smiled and added, "It's in her blood. Some girls just get the glow." That was it. No one gasped. No one objected. Because this wasn't shocking to them. It was normal. But what happened next? That was not normal. Arya closed her sketchbook and looked at them both. Calm, collected, not angry. She just smiled and said, "I don't want to look like you." Then she reached into her backpack, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and laid it right in the center of the table. It was a drawing. And when they opened it, when they saw what she'd drawn, no one at that table had anything left to say. Not my mom, not my sister, not even Sienna. Just silence. Because sometimes a child's truth, spoken with a pencil and a little bravery, can cut through years of cruelty louder than any scream. I used to love Sundays, not because of the food or the family, but because, for a while, they felt like a ritual of peace, a day to reset, to breathe. But not when they were spent at my mother's house. Every first Sunday of the month, we drive out to Delilah Cross's home in Savannah. From the outside, it's charming. White porch swing, tall hydrangeas, a neat garden full of lavender and roses. But inside, it's all tension wrapped in lace, the kind of place where nothing is truly warm, even if it smells like freshly baked bread. That house has always had rules, unspoken ones. Don't talk back. Smile when you're insulted. Stay thin. Dress well. And whatever you do, don't show too much feeling. Growing up in that house meant being measured. Constantly. Measured against my sister, against my mom's impossible standards, against the version of myself I was supposed to become, but never quite reached. My sister Talia was exactly who my mom wanted me to be. She was born elegant. She had straight blonde hair, perfect skin, and the kind of sharp jawline that turns heads. She learned to hold a teacup just right by age 6. I was the opposite. I had freckles, knobby knees, and a laugh that was too loud for the room. I liked books more than mirrors, drawing more than dance, and comfort over fashion. Mom used to tell me, "Lena, you're not unattractive. You're just better when you try." That was her way of encouraging me. So I stopped trying. By the time I was 16, I realized I'd never be what she wanted. But instead of fighting it, I just got quiet. It was easier. And then, years later, I had Aria. Aria, my wild-haired girl with eyes too big for her face and a heart twice the size of mine. She was born during a storm, both literally and metaphorically. I was a single mom, broke, and completely unsure of myself. The second I held her, I knew one thing. She would never feel like she had to earn my love. I promised myself that. From the beginning, Aria was different. Sensitive, yes, but not fragile. She'd sit for hours in her room, coloring her feelings onto the page when she didn't have words. She never wanted dolls or dresses, just notebooks, sketch pads, and pencils. I raised her to believe her value came from her kindness, her creativity, her voice. I raised her to be free from the weight I carried. But I forgot one thing. I still brought her into the same house that silenced me. At 10 years old, Aria was already starting to hear the same messages I did, just softer, coded in sweet tones, dressed in concern. You'd be so pretty if you smiled more. Maybe wear something that flatters you. Your cousin's already doing photo shoots, isn't that exciting? And every time I bit my tongue, because that house still makes me small, even now. That Sunday started like all the others. The table was set like we were hosting royalty. Gold-edged plates, too many forks, crystal glasses no one ever filled past halfway. Talia sat with Sienna, her perfect daughter, who looked like she stepped out of a catalog. Sienna was already being asked to model. She wore lip gloss and ballet flats and had the kind of effortless posture that made my mom swoon. Aria, beside me, wore mismatched socks, a hoodie with paint on the sleeves, and a braid she did herself. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest like it was armor. I could feel it coming before it happened. The comparison, the passive-aggressive jab, the performance of it all. Because in that house, no meal is served without a side of judgment. And I'd learned to live with that. But what I didn't know, what I could never have expected, was that Aria hadn't. She was listening, watching, noticing everything. And while I spent years swallowing my words, Aria had quietly found her own. She was waiting for her moment. And by the time it came, she didn't just speak up. She rewrote the rules. She picked up a pencil, and she drew the truth. And what she revealed that day changed everything. Lunch had just been served. The table looked picture perfect, like something from a Southern lifestyle magazine. Rosemary roasted chicken, scalloped potatoes, fresh rolls in a silver basket. But underneath the linen napkins and polished silverware, tension simmered like heat rising off the pavement. My daughter, Aria, sat beside me, mostly quiet, her hands folded over her sketchbook like a shield. Across from us were Talia and her daughter, Sienna, who at 11 had already perfected the subtle smugness our family seemed to wear like perfume. Sienna was everything my mother had always wanted in a granddaughter. Delicate, poised, and photogenic. That word came up a lot these days, photogenic, like it was a badge of worth. Talia, of course, couldn't resist the opportunity to brag. "She was just asked to do another photo shoot," she said as she scrolled through her phone. "The boutique owner said she's the most camera-ready girl she's ever seen. I mean, it's really just in her blood." She turned her phone toward Mom and me, a photo of Sienna in a pink tulle dress, striking a pose like she was born for the runway. My mom, Delilah, sighed with pride. "Look at that profile. We always said Talia had that bone structure, and now Sienna has it too. It's a gift. Not everyone gets it." She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. The implication hung in the air like perfume that had turned sour. Then she turned to Aria. Her eyes scanned my daughter like she was inventory. Paint on her hoodie, unruly curls, a slight ink smudge on her cheek from the pen she'd been using in the car. And then came the words, casual, measured, as if they were helpful. "You know, sweetheart, you'll probably never be as pretty as your cousin." Arya looked up, not shocked, just aware. Before I could even process it, Talia added with a smirk, "It's just genetics. It runs deep in our side of the family. Some things skip a generation." Skip a generation. The same words I'd heard my entire life. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, my hands clenched under the table. There it was again. The casual cruelty passed down like an heirloom, except now they were pointing it at Arya. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Years of practice, years of keeping the peace. And then I looked at Arya. She didn't shrink. She didn't fidget. She didn't smile politely the way I used to. Instead, she tilted her head and calmly said, "I don't want to look like you." The room paused. Even Talia raised her eyebrows. Arya wasn't being sarcastic. She wasn't being cruel. She said it with a kind of honesty only children seem to have, the kind that slices through pretense without even trying. And then, with a quiet confidence that caught me completely off guard, she reached into her backpack. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper, creased, worn, clearly handled more than once. Without a word, she placed it in the center of the table and pushed her chair back just slightly. No one moved. Talia narrowed her eyes. My mother looked almost offended by the disruption, and Sienna, to her credit, just looked confused. "What's this?" Mom asked, her voice sharper now. Arya shrugged gently. "It's something I made at school. We were supposed to draw someone we admire. I wasn't sure I'd show it to anyone." I felt my heart start to race. This wasn't planned. I didn't know she had it. I didn't know what it was. Mom unfolded the paper slowly, smoothing out the edges like she was afraid of what she'd find. And then she saw it. They all did. The color drained from my sister's face. Arya had drawn 4 women. It was unmistakable. On one side, Grandma Delilah, Aunt Talia, and Cousin Sienna, all drawn with exaggerated makeup, blank expressions, glassy eyes, and long limbs. They looked like mannequins in a store window. And next to them, me. Messy bun, a sweater with paint stains, sitting on the floor, laughing with Arya wrapped in my arms, labeled in big letters, "Real Beauty." The room went still. No one spoke, no one smiled, even the clink of forks and glasses had stopped. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a mirror. And in that moment, every word my mother had spoken, every jab, every judgment came back to her, sketched in pencil and truth. The drawing sat on the table like a truth no one wanted to admit. 4 women, 3 hollow, 1 alive. It didn't scream. It didn't accuse. But it told the truth in a way that left no one untouched. My mother stared at it, frozen. Talia leaned back like it had physically pushed her, and Sienna just blinked, looking from the drawing to her mother, then to me, then back again. Quiet, maybe for the first time that day, but it was Arya I couldn't take my eyes off of. She wasn't scared, she wasn't smug, she was steady, calm, almost gentle in her silence. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was trying to protect herself and me. She had drawn what she saw, and she had decided she wasn't going to carry the shame I had been taught to swallow. I had always promised myself I'd raise her differently, without the weight I grew up with, without the voice in her head that measured her value by her waistline or the curve of her lashes. But I forgot that even when you break free, the voices can still echo. I thought I could protect her just by being different, but silence isn't protection. Avoidance isn't strength. And now, here she was, a 10-year-old girl standing in the space I'd never dared step into, telling the truth out loud without ever raising her voice. The shame I felt in that moment wasn't for her, it was for me. I had watched my mother chip away at me for years, with harmless comparisons, with backhanded compliments, with the constant message that pretty was the only currency that mattered. And I had let it happen again, to Arya. Not as often, not as harshly, but still. And I had said nothing. Until now. I took a breath. My heart pounded like I was about to speak in front of a crowd. My fingers trembled under the table, but I looked up and said it anyway. "Arya," I said softly, "can I see it?" She slid the drawing toward me. I picked it up and looked at the details I hadn't seen before. My smile wasn't perfect. It was open, crooked, real. There were paint stains on my hands. Arya had drawn our legs tangled together, like she couldn't tell where I ended, and she began, and under it, in her careful handwriting, "I want to grow up to look like this." Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I looked up at my mother. Her face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes glassy. She looked like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Talia crossed her arms and muttered, "It's just a kid's drawing." But even her voice lacked its usual edge. She knew it wasn't just a drawing. I took another breath. "I've stayed quiet in this house for most of my life," I said. "Every time you compared us, every time you made it clear who measured up and who didn't, I let it slide because I thought that was easier than starting a fight I could never win." No one interrupted me, but I'm not going to let that happen to her. I turned to Arya. "I'm so proud of you." She didn't smile. She nodded, small and certain. Then I looked at my mom. "She doesn't need to be pretty by your standards. She doesn't need to be compared to anyone. And I'm not going to sit here and let you teach her otherwise." There it was, not a scream, not a breakdown, just a line drawn in the sand. And I wasn't stepping back. My mother opened her mouth, but then closed it again. She reached for her water glass, took a sip, and said nothing. For once. Even Talia didn't push back. She just stared at her plate. Arya quietly reached for a roll and passed it to Sienna, who took it with a sheepish smile. The moment had passed, but nothing was the same. Something had shifted. Arya had spoken in the only language she trusted, art. And I had finally backed her up, not just in my heart, but out loud. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a decision to stop the cycle, to say, "This ends with us." The silence after I spoke wasn't the cold, brittle kind I grew up with. It was different. This silence was heavy with realization. No one moved. No one reached for the salt. No one tried to change the subject. They were finally listening. For the first time in my life, I had said something in that house that wasn't muted, softened, or reshaped for someone else's comfort. And I hadn't said it with anger. I'd said it with conviction. Arya had given me the courage to do that. I looked down at her drawing again, still sitting between the roast chicken and the scalloped potatoes. The figures were so telling. My mother's stiff posture, Talia's vacant smile, Sienna's doll-like face, all drawn with careful, deliberate lines, not cruel, just honest. And then there I was, laughing in my own skin, paint on my sweater, my arms wrapped around Arya like I didn't care who was watching. That version of me, the one Arya saw, that was who I wanted to be. Talia was the first to break the silence, though not in the way I expected. She leaned in and said, "You know what? Maybe I was harsh. But let's not pretend like this drawing is some grand declaration. It's just a sketch, Lena. She's 10. She said it casually, trying to peel the moment back to something small, manageable, forgettable. But the way her voice wavered betrayed her. Before I could respond, Sienna spoke, quietly. "I think it's beautiful." Everyone turned. She was staring at the drawing, her eyes wide, thoughtful. "Aunt Lena looks really happy in it." Talia stiffened beside her. "Sweetheart, it's okay if you don't understand." "I do," Sienna said. "I like it." It was the first time I'd ever seen Sienna say something that went against her mom or grandma. She didn't look at them for approval. She looked at Arya. "Can you show me how to draw people like that?" she asked. Arya's eyebrows rose. "You want me to teach you?" Sienna nodded. Talia looked like she was trying to swallow a lemon, but Arya, she just smiled and said, "Okay." That moment cracked something open, not a dramatic transformation, no tears or apologies, but the energy in the room changed. And then, my mother, Delilah, did something completely unexpected. She cleared her throat, slowly reached across the table and pulled the drawing toward her again. She studied it like she was seeing it for the first time. Then she looked at me. Her voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't sharp either. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she said. I was preparing her for the real world." I kept my eyes on her. "You did hurt her and me." She looked down, nodding once, slowly. And then, for the first time in my life, she said the words I'd never thought I'd hear. I'm sorry. Not a performance, not deflected, just that, I'm sorry. I swallowed hard. Decades of ache sat at the base of my throat. Arya looked up at me. Did you hear that? I nodded. Yeah, baby, I did. Delilah turned to Arya and said, You're strong. I didn't expect that from you. Arya, ever steady, just said, I know. Another silence followed, but this one wasn't awkward. It was quiet like the air after a thunderstorm, cleansed, unsettled, but full of new space. Eventually, the table returned to normal. Well, a new version of normal. Talia was quieter than usual. Sienna stayed close to Arya, asking questions about sketching. My mother didn't make a single passive-aggressive remark during dessert. And me? I felt like I had taken back a piece of myself I didn't know was still waiting to be claimed, because that moment wasn't just about Arya standing up for herself. It was about all the things I had never said, all the ways I'd bent myself to stay small in that house, and how, somehow, through a child's drawing, the truth finally got a seat at the table. It's strange how one moment can change the energy in a family, not with shouting, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with something as small and quiet as a drawing from a 10-year-old girl who saw things clearly, maybe more clearly than any of us ever had. We finished lunch that day with fewer words than usual. There were no more jabs, no snide comments disguised as compliments. Just food, some small talk, and a strange kind of stillness that hovered like the scent of something just beginning to bloom. When we got home that evening, Arya immediately went to her room. I gave her space, unsure if she felt relieved, overwhelmed, or completely unbothered. With Arya, you don't always know right away. She feels things deeply but lets them settle on the inside first, like me, except she's better at understanding those feelings than I ever was. A little while later, she came out holding the drawing in her hands. I want you to have it, she said quietly. I looked at her, surprised. You sure? She nodded. Yeah, I think you need it more than they do. And she was right. That piece of paper had done what years of silence never could. It started a conversation, one that didn't end at the table. The next day, I framed it, not as a trophy, not to be hung as some triumphant act of rebellion. I put it on my desk, right where I could see it when I worked, when I doubted myself, or when I started to feel that old voice creeping in again, the one that said I wasn't enough. Because every time I looked at it, I remembered what my daughter saw in me. And that's something no one had ever shown me before. Not my mother, not my sister, not the world, just her. A few days later, I got a call from my mom. I almost didn't answer. Part of me was sure she'd pretend like it never happened, that she'd want to smooth it over, spin it into something harmless. That was always her way. But when I picked up, her voice was different, softer. I've been thinking about that drawing, she said, and about what you said. I didn't realize how much I'd passed down without even meaning to. It wasn't a full confession, but it was a start. I was taught that being pretty was power, she continued. That being noticed was the only way to survive in a room full of people who'd never listen otherwise. I think I confused survival with value. And there it was. Honesty. Real honesty. I didn't say much, just listened. That was enough. Since then, things have been different. Not perfect, but quieter. More careful. At our next family dinner, she asked Arya about her art project before commenting on her outfit. Talia didn't bring up Sienna's photo shoot until dessert, and when Arya shared a new drawing of her teacher, my mother actually said, "She's got your smile." No sarcasm, no edge, just a sentence, a bridge. And I've learned that's how healing works. It doesn't always come in one sweeping gesture. Sometimes it comes in fragments. In learning how to speak a new language after decades of miscommunication, Arya still draws all the time, more now than ever. She even started a small sketchbook called The Women I See, where she draws people who inspire her, her teacher, a neighbor, a stranger on the bus, me. And one day she said something that stayed with me since. People think being pretty is about what you wear, but real beauty is what someone feels like when they're next to you. You feel like home. I had to turn away so she wouldn't see me cry. Because for all the years I spent trying to be enough, trying to be seen, trying to be accepted by the people who were supposed to love me most, my daughter already saw me, not for what I looked like, but for who I really was. And more importantly, she saw herself. Clearly, strongly, unapologetically. She didn't just break a cycle that day at the table, she redrew it on her own terms. So if you're a parent watching this, or a daughter who grew up hearing she wasn't enough, I want to say this. You don't have to keep repeating the story you were given. You can start a new one. You can raise a child who doesn't flinch when someone tries to define her worth. You can raise a child who tells the truth in pencil, in paper, in presence. And that truth will echo louder than anything spoken in judgment. Because the most powerful thing we can teach our daughters isn't how to fit into the world, it's how to redesign it. Thanks for spending this time with me and my story. If it made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own journey, your own childhood, or your own child, then I hope it stays with you a little longer than just today. We all carry things passed down from the people who raised us, but every now and then, someone brave enough, like my daughter, comes along and reminds us that we're allowed to rewrite the script. If this story meant something to you, please like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts or hear your story too. And if you want more honest, emotional, real-life stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss one. Thanks for watching, and take care of each other.